Okay, let's unpack this. Picture this. A ship's crew, they're on edge, right?
Uh,
Their radar lights up. Small boat, coming in fast,
yeah.
alarms blaring, and the captain, Richard Phillips, probably just thinking, oh, not again.
That sinking feeling. And it wasn't just hypothetical, was it? That was the reality.
Exactly. Multiple approaches, back to back sometimes.
And what's really striking, looking at the sources you shared, is this wasn't just, random crime.
No, not at all.
It points to something much deeper, more complex going on off the Somali coast.
Absolutely. So for you listening, this deep dive isn't about like swashbuckling pirates from the movies.
Right.
We're aiming to really dissect this, using these sources to understand how it started, why it blew up like it did, the impact.
And why it faded, but now seems to be, well, coming back.
Exactly. We'll look at the money, the human side, and the core issues driving it.
Okay, so looking at the timeline of these sources, it really kicks off around 2000.
Mm-hmm.
But the big escalation that happens during the war in Somalia, sort of 2006 to 2009,
That conflict period seems crucial.
definitely correlates. Intense civil war, spike in piracy.
And you might find this surprising, the first targets. Not always the huge container ships.
No, initially, early 2000s, it was mostly international fishing boats.
Which points to something really important from the sources. This initial phase wasn't just about grabbing loot.
It was rooted in conflict over resources, wasn't it?
Yeah, a major grievance. Somali fishermen felt foreign fleets were basically stealing their fish, costing the country, what, $300 million a year since '91?
Using destructive methods, too, like dynamite fishing.
Just devastating. And that resource conflict, well, it morphed into hijacking for ransom as the country fell apart.
That's a key point the sources bring up, these initial armed groups formed by fishermen.
Yeah.
Their first aim wasn't necessarily hijacking. It was more about deterring these foreign boats, the ones they saw as invaders.
Sort of like self-defense initially.
Kind of. They started by taxing the illegal trawlers, as the sources put it.
But then the war got worse.
And things shifted. That taxing turned into full-blown hijacking for ransom.
You can almost see the grim logic, right? Country collapsing, desperate poverty.
It became a business. A very dangerous, but potentially very lucrative business.
And for unemployed young men in Somalia, well, it looked like a way to make serious money.
And the rest of the world definitely started noticing.
Oh, yeah.
The sources talk about growing alarm from international groups worried about the cost to global trade.
Billions, right? We'll get into that.
And there were even whispers, suggestions in the sources that maybe some elements inside Somalia were actually working with the pirates.
For political game or financial?
Both, potentially, suggesting it wasn't just desperation, but maybe some organized crime elements too.
So who were these guys, actually? The sources give us a bit of a profile.
Mostly young men. A Somali government list from 2010 said something like 80% were from the southern conflict zones.
Makes sense given the instability there.
And by 2012, the main base of operations seems to have been the Galmudug region.
Though Puntland was a big hub earlier, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, until they launched a pretty serious anti-piracy crackdown.
And their methods, they didn't stay static, did they?
Not at all. Fascinating how they adapted. Started with those small, fast skiffs like the one Philip saw.
Right.
But then they got smarter, using captured fishing trawlers or even cargo boats as motherships.
Allowing them to operate way further out.
Exactly. Way out into the Indian Ocean, hundreds of miles offshore.
And the weapons got heavier, too. We're not talking cutlasses here.
No. AK-47s, RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades. Serious stuff.
And it wasn't just about brute force, was it? The sources mentioned technology.
Yeah, GPS, satellite phones, which hints at
Yeah.
maybe outside help.
Like an international network feeding them information, that moves it beyond just local gangs.
It suggests a higher level of organization, potentially.
Okay, so the attack itself, how did that usually go down?
Pretty direct, often. Approach the ship, sometimes firing warning shots or even directly at the bridge to intimidate the crew.
Get them to stop the vessel.
Right. Then up go the ladders, the ones with grappling hooks, board the ship.
And the goal, initially at least, wasn't violence against the crew.
Primarily ransom. The crew were bargaining chips. Hostages, usually unharmed at first, were key to getting that payout.
Okay, we've covered the how and the who. Let's dig into the why, the root causes.
And the sources are pretty clear. The absolute collapse of Somalia's central government in 1991 is fundamental.
A failed state, literally,
Yeah.
designated as such in '92.
Right. And when you have a failed state, the government just can't control its territory. can't provide basic security or services.
Creates a power vacuum.
Exactly. And into that vacuum step, groups like pirates. Legitimate businesses like fishing just couldn't operate safely anymore.
And that state failure, it just rippled outwards, didn't it?
Absolutely. Directly fueled the economic desperation we talked about.
No jobs, no opportunities.
The lure of a huge ransom payment becomes almost irresistible for some.
And then layer on top of that weak law enforcement. Or non-existent, really. And corruption.
Massive corruption. One source ranked Somalia as the most corrupt country in the world in 2023.
Wow.
So officials could be paid off to look the other way. Maybe even help facilitate the piracy for a cut.
Plus, trying to patrol that massive coastline over 3,300 kilometers.
Impossible without a functioning state and navy, which also opened the door for that illegal fishing we mentioned earlier.
It's all connected. And the environmental angle is crucial too, isn't it?
Hugely important and maybe overlooked sometimes. That illegal fishing wasn't just competition. It was destroying the livelihoods of coastal communities.
Depleting the fish stocks they relied on.
And worse, the sources mentioned the possibility, the strong suspicion, that Somalia's unguarded waters became a dumping ground.
For what?
Industrial toxic waste from other countries.
No way! That's horrific.
Imagine the anger that would cause. Your fishing grounds destroyed, and now your water's potentially poisoned.
Fuels resentment, distrust.
A former UN envoy apparently linked this environmental damage directly to fueling the civil war itself.
So you've got these, legitimate grievances, stolen fish, maybe toxic waste, combined with zero government to appeal to or to stop it.
It makes it almost understandable, though not justifiable, how some Somalis might have seen the early pirate actions differently.
As a form of defense.
The sources touch on that, yeah. This idea of cultural acceptance, even legitimation, in the beginning.
Fighting back against the illegal fishing and dumping.
One Somali news site apparently reported 70% support for piracy as national defense.
Wow. Even Gaddafi apparently argued it was self-defense against the West.
Controversial, obviously,
Yeah.
but it shows that perception exists.
It definitely adds layers, not just simple crime. And okay, let's shift to the impact, the cost.
Astronomical is the word. That Oceans Beyond Piracy report in 2011 estimated, $6.6 to $6.9 billion a year?
Billion with a B. And that includes everything. Insurance hikes, Navy patrols.
Ransoms, security guards, rerouting ships, higher fuel costs, everything.
Maersk, the shipping giant, apparently spent over $200 million just in 2011 because of piracy.
Crazy figures. Though it's fair to say some analyses mentioned in the sources suggest maybe those overall costs were a bit inflated.
How so?
Well, they argued the estimates didn't always factor in the money flowing into the maritime security industry or insurance, or even the local economies in places like Puntland, where pirates spent their money early on.
Ah, okay. So some people were benefiting from the crisis itself.
Potentially. But ransom payments definitely skyrocketed. That's undeniable.
And you mentioned pirate spending, boosting local economies. Any other unexpected side effects?
Yeah, an interesting one mentioned is fishermen in Kenya.
What about them?
They actually reported bigger catches because the piracy scared away the big foreign trawlers that used to overfish their waters.
Huh. An unintended consequence. But the human cost, that's where it gets really dark.
Absolutely brutal. The sources talk about seafarers facing terrible abuse as hostages.
Physical violence.
Violence, neglect, malnutrition. 62 deaths reported over just 4 years. Suicide, too. The trauma for survivors was immense.
And the fear must have been constant.
Which also led to problems, like armed guards on ships, maybe using excessive force sometimes. Tragic cases where innocent fishermen were mistaken for pirates and killed.
A truly grim situation all around. And you mentioned profiteers, insurance, security firms.
Yeah. Anytime there's a crisis like this, certain industries inevitably see growth.
Okay, so faced with this massive problem, what did the world do?
Well, a lot, actually. The most visible part was the international navies stepping up.
Like Combined Task Force 150.
Exactly. CTF 150, a multinational coalition patrolling a huge area, the Indian Ocean, Gulf of Aden.
And the UN got involved?
Yep. Security Council resolutions. Crucially, with the Somali government's consent, they authorized foreign navies to operate inside Somali waters.
Which is a big deal, legally.
Huge. Allowed them to pursue pirates right to the coast. And the EU had its own big mission, Operation Atalanta.
But it wasn't easy, was it? Patrolling that much ocean.
Immense challenges.
Yeah.
Just the sheer size of the area. And trying to tell a pirate skiff from a fishing boat isn't always simple.
Plus legal hurdles in prosecuting captured pirates.
Yeah. Different national laws, issues with evidence, where to try them.
Yeah.
It was complicated.
So navies helped, but maybe weren't the whole solution. What else?
Private security. That became a game changer.
Armed guards on the ships themselves.
Exactly. And the sources are pretty stark on this. Apparently, no ship with armed guards aboard was successfully hijacked.
That's a remarkable statistic, a very effective deterrent then.
Highly effective. Changed the risk calculation for the pirates significantly.
Were there any efforts from within Somalia?
Yes, definitely. The Islamic Courts Union, when they were briefly in power, actually cracked down hard and suppressed piracy quite effectively.
Interesting. And Puntland.
They launched a major campaign too, set up their own maritime police force. And captured pirates started facing trials in the U.S., Netherlands, Yemen, other places.
So all these things combined, they worked.
They did, yeah. After 2011, 2012, piracy dropped off dramatically. Armed guards were probably the single biggest factor, but the naval patrols and prosecutions helped too.
To the point where they actually removed the high-risk area designation for the Indian Ocean in early 2023.
Correct. It really seemed like the problem was, if not solved, then very much under control after years of no major incidents.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there?
Unfortunately, yes. The sources point to a worrying resurgence starting in the early 2020s.
That hijacking in December 2023, the first cargo ship taken in 6 years.
And then the ruin, a tanker, hijacked in March 2024. The first tanker taken since 2017? That got a lot of attention.
It definitely signals something has changed. Why now?
Well, the sources suggest the core problems never really went away.
State fragility, economic hardship.
Exactly. Those underlying drivers are still there. And maybe international focus shifting elsewhere, like the Gaza conflict, drawing resources and attention away, created an opportunity.
A vacuum, again, of sorts.
Potentially, yeah. Less patrolling, less vigilance, perhaps.
And we're seeing action again, right? India rescuing that ship in March 24, arresting pirates.
Yes. The Indian Navy intercepted the ruin, rescued the crew, and brought 35 pirates back to Mumbai for trial.
And attempts are still happening, that Crystal Arctic incident in May 24.
Right. It shows the threat hasn't disappeared. It's active again.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, Somali piracy, it's clear, was never simple.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Deeply rooted in state collapse, poverty, genuine environmental grievances, lack of law enforcement. A perfect storm, really.
And while the international response, especially those armed guards, did beat it back significantly.
The roots remain. And that seems to be why we're seeing this concerning comeback.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to chew on. Given how deep these issues run the state failure, the economy, the environment, can just focusing on security, on navies and guards, ever be a sustainable fix?
Or do we need something more?
Exactly. Do we need comprehensive efforts that tackle governance, that build economic alternatives, that address the environmental damage? Is that the only way to get lasting stability and safe shipping lanes?
And what responsibility does the international community have, especially considering that history of illegal fishing and potentially waste dumping?
Complex questions.